Welcome to Fraud Exposed. My name is Lori Maddock from Credit Education Consultants. And today I'm actually going to get interviewed by my two cyber fraud experts, Win and Ram Beer. Now, if you want to avoid fraud or know what to do if you've been a victim, stay with us. We don't want you to get ripped off. So I'm going to first have you guys introduce yourselves. Rambier, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your company, and then Win can do the same, and then you guys can take turns asking me questions.
Absolutely. I'm Rambu Bhutani, CEO and virtual CISO of Cyberculture. Our focus is fractional CISO consulting services.
I'm Edison Win-Win. I'm a founder of Cyber Armor, where we focus in the dark web.
Okay. All right. So Rambier, why don't you ask me the first question?
Absolutely. Thank you, Lori. How do credit bureaus get their information on you and it is always accurate? And
It
is it
is
all
not
no,
always.
good.
Yeah, nope, it's not always accurate. Bureaus pull their information from many different sources and databases that may or may not be you. So I've seen reports that have different names. I've seen junior, senior. I've seen someone deceased with someone alive. I've
Wow.
seen different social security numbers and different addresses that may not belong to a specific person. It's up to you, the consumer, to verify and dispute anything. So just as an example, I'll go back many years. I had a client with a fairly common Hispanic name, and she had the middle initial A. On her credit report, and she had never ever purchased the house before, she was a first-time home buyer. There was the name of a person who had the same name with a different middle initial. Upon tracking that second person down, it turned to be a woman who was actually in prison at the time, who bought 10 houses, let them equity strip them, and let them go into foreclosure.
Wow.
So if you have a common name, for example, I had a client years ago with a fairly common name, lived next door in an apartment to someone with the same last name. And the credit bureaus just automatically assume if you have any of these key factors or indicative data, as they call it, they just put it on your report and assume it's you. That's how their system works. Not a fair system. So the very first thing I tell people to check for is their personal information. Is it correct? And is it you? All right. And
So,
I'll let
question
Win
for
ask me.
you. Um,
Yeah, sure.
so given that they are gathering the information and aggregated for you, right, creating a profile for you with different type of misinformation, for example,
Yes.
and they would calculate your credit score incorrectly, right?
Well, yes, if it's not just the personal information, but accounts are showing up on your
Mhm.
report and you know they're not you, it's one of two things. You either have a file merged with somebody else's, or you're a victim of ID theft. Typically, if you're a victim of ID theft, you'll start getting phone calls or letters saying you owe money and so forth. Um, and even if you, for example, sign off affidavits that say it's not you, there are lots of cases against companies, including the credit bureaus, to the tune of millions of dollars a year, because they're refusing to remove the incorrect information. So it's hard to distinguish between the two, but the trigger is, are you suddenly getting phone calls? Are you suddenly getting letters about money and, collections and so forth? Yes.
Okay. So given that they create, let's say that they put in my profile that I have additional house, um, what do I do from who do I contact to get that removed or adjust?
Okay, the credit bureaus really don't do that much to help you, but there's a creditor list at the bottom. So if you can find who the creditor is, then you will contact them directly and say, hey, I don't own this second house. You have the wrong person and you are affecting my credit, because that's an installment loan, just like
Mm,
your own house is an installment loan. So if you have, let's just say you have a $200,000 house, the one you own, and now you have another $200,000 house that you don't own, well, that just made it look to any lender like you owe $400,000 in mortgages. And so that can be a violation of both the Fair Credit Reporting Act and the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, because they're putting something artificial if it injures you, let's say it shows up on your report with the second house, and now, hey, you want to go get a home equity line of credit, or you are applying for a loan for a car. What it's going to do is it's going to give you a much lower score than you would have if that second house was not on there. And from the attorneys I've worked with, they consider that damages. And in that case, you might possibly have a lawsuit against either the credit bureaus, yep, or the company that, is listing on your report.
Interesting.
Yes.
So, given the TransUnion, the equity facts and experience, they have a lot of our information in their database. Have they been breached?
They've all been breached. TransUnion was breached in 2022, Equifax back in 2017, and Experian was breached in 2013, and they had a data leak in 2015. So what does that mean? It means that almost everybody's information, it's been compromised. You have to, at this point, assume that your information has been compromised and is on the dark web. Now, unfortunately, not much is done by our government in cases like this. Typically, there'll be a class action. You might get 20 bucks. That's not going to help you if you've been a victim. I help people who are victims of identity theft. That's part of what I do. But no one really does anything. The other option is if you don't want the 20 bucks, they'll give you free credit monitoring for a year or two. And just to give you an example, I have 6 credit monitoring services. That tells you that 6 companies have been breached that I did business with. I use a monitoring service that shows me what companies were breached and how much information they got. And I know that you are offering something like that, but without all the credit monitoring fees, so it'll be a lot less expensive. But yes, you assume that you're on the dark web. Everybody should automatically assume that right now. All
That's
right,
that.
Rambier, got a question for me?
No, I want to. Sorry, going back to what you just
Sure.
said, it's very interesting because, like, how are these companies like Equifax and TransUnion and Experience protecting their data, right? Because they've had so many breaches over the past maybe decade and a half. What's the and again, this sort of ties back to the whole identity theft and people
Yes,
opening up accounts under your name. So if they're taking their data very lax, then that's not fair to the consumer because you expect that, hey, all your sensitive data, your what you own, credit cards
exactly.
can be leaked, right? And of course, Win can attest that a lot of this stuff is probably being sold on the dark web, or lists are being sold on the dark web of everybody's like assets and what they own. It's unfortunate. Like this is
Right.
how you get credit. So when it gets stolen, it becomes an administrative nightmare.
It absolutely does. Now, some credit monitoring services offer people, restoration for free and so forth. I teach people consumer credit. I help people who are victims of identity theft for a fee. And I myself was a victim of identity theft in 2010. And somebody got all of my information, every single thing. And as a result of that, I must do my due diligence in knowing every day what's in my bank account. My credit card send me notices of every purchase, so I know everything. But what you said, the part that disturbs me most is that when the credit bureaus are pulling you assume it's under your name, your social, your date of birth, but there can be other people that have your name. And so they're looking for commonalities, I guess a certain percentage of commonalities. A lot of times I'll tell people if they don't have a common name, Google their name and see, are there other people that have your name, especially in your state. Now, if you common name, you much more are likely to have a merged file because there are going to be 20 million people named John Smith.
Yeah, no, that's
They're
funny.
looking for that. So
Yeah, but to your point, like Win and Runbury Butani is not a very common
common
name,
name,
knock on wood, but you're right. It gets mixed up. And then let's say a John Smith all of a sudden opened up an account for another John Smith for $30,000 line of credit. That wasn't the right John Smith.
right? then it's considered a merged file and it becomes a battle. I mean, you can dispute with the credit bureaus, but typically it eventually, if you send in a dispute and say, this is not mine, either they're going to take it off or they're not. A lot of times they do not take it off. And there have been lawsuits against the credit bureaus for exactly the situation you're talking about. I remember one story where a lady had a name and another woman with the same name several states away. And the second lady's information showed up on the first. And somehow the first woman got in touch with the second woman who filled out legal paperwork like an affidavit stating that this is her, this is mine, this does not belong to this other person.
Mm.
And in the end, one of the credit, or well, I think all the credit bureaus that were reporting it did get sued. So people win millions of dollars. They think that they're at the mercy of the credit bureaus because they're giant corporations. When in reality, if you look up the Fair Credit Reporting Act and the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, for example, it explicitly explains, you have a right yourself to have your credit reporting properly. The credit bureaus, creditors, collection agencies, they have a right to have information reporting about you accurately. I'm going to tell you, depending upon the study you read, anywhere between 20 and 90% of people have inaccurate information on their report. They don't know how to read their report. They don't realize that they have rights. And if they go through a process of disputing and they keep great documentation, most attorneys in cases like this, if it's a good case when they evaluate it, they take it on contingency, meaning you're not paying out of pocket, only if you win. And then oftentimes you get that credit line stripped off the report. And if you want, I can give you a little scary story.
Good.
I have a Kia Soul, my bright blue happy Kia Soul. I'm not going to tell you, well, I blew my own rule because normally I tell people, go to your bank or credit union. They only pull your credit once. It's a hard pull. It's a few points off. I did it at the dealer. I made them sign off. They were only going to pull my credit one time. Though the bank, I'm not going to mention them. The worst bank in history is what I got. Thousands of complaints. Excuse me. So what happened was I made sure at the dealer that their agreement said that there's no prepayment penalty. Because here's a little secret, people. If you have an installment loan like a car and you make two separate checks per month and they're separate, you can end up paying several months in advance and you could pay the car off early, right? You might get some interest back. So there's no prepayment penalty. Well, one day I actually opened one of the bills that still came in the mail that normally says I owe $0 because again, I'm paid up in advance. This time it had my payment in it and I kind of lost it. I'm going, wait, I'm paid out months. Why am I getting a bill? I call them up and what they say to me basically is, well, we changed our policy back in January and now there is a prepayment penalty. So you must make the payment every month, even if you've made extra payments. And I'm sitting here going, what? I go, and so you did not think to notify me by mail, by email, by phone call, by fax, by anything? Nope, didn't notify anybody. So they basically turned their contract into a unilateral contract without telling their customers. Now, had I not caught it by opening that piece of mail, I would have had a late payment and it probably would have dropped me 100 points. In the end, I did speak to an attorney and he said, yep, you have a case, but it's going to cost you lots of money. So why don't you just pay a fee, transfer it to a bank you do business with now? And I did, because you know what? I had to get rid of this first bank. That's how bad they were. Now that's just the money part. Skip ahead a few months. I'm now with another bank. The first bank is still reporting me on my credit report. You cannot have two companies reporting the same debt at the same time. So it took a while, got to the corporate office. They were dingbats. They didn't know what they were doing, but they got rid of it. Then about 6, 7, 8 months go by, and all of a sudden, one of my 6 credit monitoring services says, there's been a change to your report to the negative. And when I open it up, the first bank went back and marked me late on 4 payments from the previous year, which is actually impossible when you're making 2 payments, separate payments a month. At that point, I did call an attorney. the only way there would be damages really is if I had been applying for a loan and been denied, because it looks like I owe twice what I actually owe. So what I did was I called the first bank the next day, and all I asked for was an accounting of every payment I've ever made. Next day, it was a miracle because guess what? They put my report back to where it should have been. So you're dealing with some companies that have no clue what they're doing.
Mm.
Credit bureaus themselves are just repositories. They claim that they are maintaining a file on you. There's no physical file on you. It's just a computerized account of you. So one of the things is if you don't have a common name, I always tell people Google alert, do a Google alert on themselves to see do they show up in other places on the internet. I'm a little off topic here, but when there was a situation I had with my business phone number where it showed up on some really nasty website that was no longer in existence. And like to me, it's a hurt to my credibility. And I guess I emailed Google, but he was actually able to get it off. So it gives you an idea that no one is really overseeing anything. And especially with the credit bureaus, it is an automated system. More than 99% of the time, it's optically scanned. Nobody is really reading your paperwork. It's scanned, converted to a 2-digit code, travels via their software program to the other side. If what's on the other side, the creditors and collectors have input about you, it sees if it matches up. If it doesn't, it might come back better and it might come back worse. And unless you, the consumer, are diligent about it, no one cares. And I'm sure that there are millions of people who are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars of interest on their homes because they just don't know how to read a credit report and what to look for. Long
Absolutely.
answer, but gives you an idea of how bad it really is
Yeah,
there.
no, no, that's good to know. All right, shall we go to the next question? Or
Sure.
okay, what is a fraud alert?
A fraud alert is what you put on you can contact the credit bureaus, and the way I recommend to do it, there's a website called gethuman.com, and you can type in separately TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. It will give you the fastest way to speak to a real person by bypassing prompts if there are any. And then you want to be able to tell them that you think you're a victim of fraud. They will have you will have to fill out an identity theft affidavit, which is available at the Federal Trade Commission site, ftc.gov. It's actually built up now to a bigger site where it's more specific on how to do it. You go to a notary and have it notarized, and you send that in with the information required to the credit bureaus. And what that does is it puts a notice on your report so that if you go to a creditor and say, hey, I want a loan, they're going to say, well, Rambier, what is this fraud alert? Or what is your phone number? They want to verify accuracy and let your other future creditors know that you have had a problem with fraud. That's what a fraud alert is.
Got it.
Is that
Thank
similar to the security freeze, or is that something
It, it,
different?
It is. It's a little bit different, and it should be made mandatory by the credit bureaus, in my opinion, because it is going to protect, it's 99% of the time, it is going to protect someone trying to open an account on you because most lenders pull credit reports before giving you credit. So fraud alert is basically saying, I am a victim of fraud or believe I may be a victim of fraud. A security freeze is a lockdown of your credit reports. So you can do it before you're a victim. And so I'm going to read it out. I know you're going to put it at the end, but you need to call each credit bureau separately. So if you call Equifax at 800-349-9960, Experian is 888-397-3742, and TransUnion is 888-909-8872. They will help you lock down your accounts so that no one's going to give you credit. So now, let's say you go to buy a car, because this is where even I forget. I'll go to buy a car. Usually, dealers use Equifax, and I'll get there and go, oops, I forgot to unfreeze my credit. So I will call Equifax and say, can you unfreeze my credit for today and tomorrow? And the next day, put the freeze back on. That gives the lender a chance to go in and actually pull my credit from that particular bureau. And I give them enough time to do that, and then it automatically should lock back up. You give them the date you want it to lock. So if you don't have security freezes on your accounts, you should, because this is a fraud prevention mechanism that is very effective. You can use monitoring services where you pay monthly to see different things. Uh, my website is crediteducationconsultants.com. And if you go to the more helpful information site, the link, you'll see the monitoring site that I personally use. It gives me much more information than any other monitoring service. And it also gives me email alerts to changes. I've evaluated a lot of them, tried a lot of different ones over the years. This one is not cheap, but it's good. And I think that's the important thing, is knowing where I'm standing. So I am ready then for the next question.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
Scam. What if I receive phone calls from a person claiming a judgment will be placed against me in 3 days and that I'll lose my legal rights to fight back?
Yes, and I'll share a story in a second, but first off, you have to be served. If you haven't been served, then something's wrong. The debt has to be within the statute of limitations in your state, and it's for debt collection and reporting. And you have to get, if someone calls you, you want to get the name of the company, the name of the person you're speaking with, and reverse Google search that number. So the story is, I had three friends. They were all top clients of mine. They all did a lot of hard work. And in a 2-week period, these three friends slash former clients called me up with the identical story. What happened was they got a phone call saying, hey, I'm from XYZ company, and it happened to be just one company, by the way, XYZ company, and we are putting a judgment against you in 3 days for a hospital bill for $10,000 from 11 years ago. And I'm like, okay, people, you were my top clients. You don't remember this. You did, okay? You did not, no one served you. You can go check in your county court records to see, is there anything that says you have been served? Is there a lis pendens? Did anybody start a lawsuit against you? A company cannot just put a judgment against you by a phone call. That's the first thing. Next thing, how old the debt is. Well, here in Florida, there is a 5-year statute of limitations on most types of debt collection. You are telling me that this medical debt from 2011, which is at the time was 12 years old when they called me. Well, guess what? You can't collect on that type of a debt after 12 years. It's 5 years here for debt collection, and it's 7 for credit reporting. And you have to know those things. So when a company does that, it's typically a scam. Now, one of the things that I do is I have loaded on my phone a recording app. So if I am going to be doing, if I think someone's scamming me, or I'm talking to customer service where I don't think they're solving a problem right, and they say, we're recording this call, because debt collectors actually do say we are recording this call if they're legitimate. And I'll say, so there's no misunderstanding. I am also recording this call. If they hang up, probably a scammer. But that's where I do the reverse Google search. I do more. I want to see. And in this particular case, it was a scam number that called the same three people with the exact same story. And what they were trying to do was get them to pay the money by like a wire transfer, or a cash app, because they threatened them with that 3-day judgment against their report when they never got served. So I'm not a lawyer. That's my disclaimer. But this is what I've learned from attorneys, and I share it with people because I get a lot of people crying, about what happened. So I just said there's a 7-year on most types of debt, a 7-year time frame, statute of limitations on credit reporting for most types of debt. And I had a lady, and I cried for this phone call. All of her debts were older than 7 years, and she paid them. Illegal, illegal. There has to be a notice if it's older than the time frame within your state. And I had to send her to an attorney in that case because feeling they were all scam companies. So she may have just totally lost out.
That's so sad.
Wow. When a consumer dispute with the credit bureau, what information do they need to provide?
Okay. They need two forms of ID. Name, address on the letter, phone number, two copies of ID. One is either birth certificate or social security card, and the other is a copy of your passport showing your photo or a photo driver's license. It must show your current address. So when a credit bureau is breached, your information, your information goes to the dark web. That's where it's going. But you have to provide those two forms of ID. Now, why is that dangerous? Because if your mail doesn't make it there, or someone from the post office steals it, or people go through your mailbox, the credit bureau will not honor a dispute without that information that contains your social security and date of birth. So I tell people when they're sending it, do it certified return receipt and scotch tape the back of the envelope closed. Make it harder to access that information. All right.
Okay, are we on to the next question or?
Yep, go for it.
Okay, and save the best for last. Should consumers be diligent about checking their credit reports frequently, as well as their credit card statement and bank account details?
Yes. Now, I am the crazy credit lady. I'm crazy credit lady because I am exceptionally diligent in how I check. So I am constantly checking my credit reports. Not just when there's a change, it's a habit of mine because having been a victim of ID theft and knowing my information is the dark web, I check mine at least once a week. Most people don't even check their credit once a year. They can actually check once a year through annualcreditreport.com. It won't give the scores, but it will give them the three bureaus information so that you can see it. This is where when mortgage people or realtors send me clients, they find surprises. So in other words, maybe the mortgage guy has already pulled credit. Surprise, the person goes, "Oh, wait, that's not mine. I paid that off years ago. Not mine. Don't know what this is." And they're trying to get ready to close on a house and they're going to lose that deal.
Mm,
Those are the types of clients I often get that I have to teach them very quickly how to try and negotiate whether it's really legitimately their debt or if it's not their debt, how to get it off quickly. Um, Most people do not read their credit card statements. Okay. My statements are online. I look at everything. And the way fraudsters check your credit card account is they put in very small numbers, 87 cents or, $1. Most people look at that and they don't think anything about it. But that's sort of a tip that who's the creditor? And when you're dealing with credit card fraud, most credit card companies will make you first speak to the company. So they usually provide a phone number to see, and then you can determine from there, is this really yours or is it not? Um, People who go to gyms who use their credit cards, for example, you can go in and verbally say, I'm canceling as of this month. And guess what happens next month? You get another bill. You got to send a certified return receipt letter if you're doing something like that. Everything certified, return receipt letter, keep proof of everything you send out, keep proof of everything you get. I actually scan everything into my computer. So if a particular company calls up and says, "Oh, we had a problem with this," bingo bango, I go back to my computer file and I find all the documents. Now, regarding your bank accounts, okay, so I'm a credit specialist, but when it comes to cash accounts, most monitoring services don't offer anything. Some do. Like I have one where if a new bank account is added, it actually does show me, hey, your bank added on a new account. Again, because of what's happening, I look at my cash accounts every single day. I get an email from them. I set it up in my portal. You can do that. Same thing with the credit cards. If I am getting, if I go somewhere and make a charge or I do an online charge, as soon as that charge goes through, I immediately get an email back and I see, does this match up? About a year or so ago, I had to go to Miami and I went with a friend and we stopped at a restaurant on the way back. Now, this I know had to be a scam because a lot of these credit card scams are done through restaurants. And the restaurant, it was a chain, and they said, "Well, our machine, our credit card machine is not working." And they whipped out one of the old style, I'm talking like we haven't seen in probably 20 years, old style credit card machines that were manual. And what we had to do was write our credit card number, expiration, and then fill everything out, and they gave you a slip. That night I get home, it's like 11:30 at night, I just happened to be checking my email, and there's a transaction for $39.99 in Arizona. Now, I'm coming back from Miami, so how would there be a charge from Arizona? So I immediately called the credit card company, and they took it right off when I told them the story as fraud. But as a result of being a victim of fraud, a victim of identity theft, my credit cards change frequently. So it's a little bit of an annoyance. No, actually, it's a big annoyance because if you are doing auto pay, now you have to do what? You have no credit cards if you have a problem because you're trying to get new ones and it becomes a problem. So one of the things I just want to recommend here is don't use auto debit, don't use ATM. You guys know there's skimming machines. I could tell you lots of stories. Don't give someone access to your cash accounts. If you're going to pay something automatically, do it by credit card or do auto pay where you're getting their account number and they're not getting yours. So diligence is very important. That's how I've managed to maintain some form of sanity is by having a system that I just do every day as if it's part of my normal life. All right. You guys have
All right.
any other questions for me?
No, thank you. That's very
No,
insightful.
no, thank you. I've learned quite a bit today, even more than I really thought. Thank you so
Than
much.
you expected. It's scary if there were better ways for the credit bureaus to stop the hacking, then that would stop the fraud. How is that going to happen? I don't know. So I always tell people, assume you're already on the dark web. What would you do to protect yourself? Credit card purchase, generally, you're going to have an easier time getting your money back. If you use a debit card, which is cash, you know how much harder it is to get your money back? They already have your cash. Who's going to fight for you? So use the credit card if you think there might be, a problem. Skip the debit cards, skip the ATM cards. I haven't used them in years, and then I don't have to deal with that type of fraud. So, all right, well, you guys did a great job interviewing me, and
Thank
I
you.
want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in today. And we'll be back soon on Fraud Exposed.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.